वेलकम बैक टू अदर एपिसोड ऑफ थॉट बिहाइंड थिंग्स। आज हमारे साथ मौजूद है एक बहुत ही खास मेहमान हु इज़ अगेन वेयर इन द सीरीज जहाँ पर हम आए हुए हैं लाहौर। वी गेटिंग आवर सेकंड मोबाइल गेस्ट विद अस टुडे इज़ काशिफ मंसूर हु इज़ द सीनियर वाइस प्रेसिडेंट एंड द हेड ऑफ सर्विस डिलीवरी at Systems Limited. Sir, thank you so much for joining the program.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम, thanks for having me here.
थोड़ा सा मुझे ज़रा एज अ स्टार्टर बताइएगा कि कहाँ पर आप where were you born और कहाँ पर आपने अर्ली लाइफ अपनी गुजारी?
So as I told you earlier, I'm no Bill Gates, so I don't know why people would be very interested in knowing my childhood, but since you brought it up, my parents tell me that I was born in Multan. So obviously I did not know. So I have no evidence of judging if they are.
There's no
right
birth certificate.
उस ज़माने में इतना कोई certificate तो नहीं थे, but so born in Multan. I'm the only son. I have an elder sister. She's a doctor. And then from my birth till grade 7, pretty much in Multan.
Right.
And then after that, this was the time when Ziaul Haq was in full vogue. And certain amount of Islamization and conservatism was being shoved down across the society. And because in Multan we only had one good school, which was a missionary school. So the missionary school was in the crosshair. So jitna unka English medium वगैरह, it was being converted into Urdu medium and everything. Even though my mother herself was a master's in Urdu in the time jab women education was rare. But she thought that she was always a little bit of adventurous in her life as well. So she thought that agar khud Urdu medium mein padhaungi, so that's my choice.
Right.
But being forced by the government, imposed nahi hoga. So wahan se phir our parents started looking at what other options are there. हॉस्टल की तो कैडेट कॉलेज हसन अब्दाल वहाँ पे शॉर्टलिस्ट किया, एग्ज़ाम हुआ, तो देन आई जॉइन कैडेट कॉलेज।
किस क्लास?
8th क्लास से 12th क्लास।
How was that? I mean, that must have been something, right?
So I hated every moment of it because I was the only son. The लाडला वहाँ पे आर्मी का एक वो होता है, and to an extent that in 9th grade I actually ran away. So आप सोचेंगे इट वॉज़ अ पठान एरिया, ये ज़ियाउल हक के ज़माने की बात है। सो वहाँ से मैं रात को दीवार टाप के अकेला बस पे मैं बैठा, और वहाँ से ये डेवू वगैरह मोटरवे तो होती नहीं थी। सो आई लैंडेड अप इन पिंडी एंड आई टाइम्ड my exit such that I'm not missed, right? So it has to be late night. वो तकिया और चादर वो छुपा के, only one of my friends knew that's what I'm doing. तो वो आया, उसने जिस तरह दुल्हन को रुखसत करते हैं वो खुदा हाफिज़ किया, रोना धोना हुआ, अल्लाह करे आप पहुंच जाएं। हमने को सेल फोन भी नहीं होते थे।
Right.
So at middle of the night I reached पिंडी, और वहाँ से न्यू खान बसें होती थी, वो I had to pick that up, and obviously I got flagged, क्योंकि ये वो ज़माना था जब बसों में थोड़ा धमाके भी हो रहे थे। तो I got flagged, उन्होंने कहा बेटा आप अकेले, what is happening, ये वो। So I had to cook up a story कि जी वो parents निकल गए और मैं whatever. So I don't know they figured out or not. So after around 18-20 hours of journey, I finally reached my home. मुल्तान। तो उस वक्त तक जो कैडेट कॉलेज में पता चल चुका था, so they had called my parents. My parents were freaking out. Only son. My mother was कि अब आ जाए, मैं नहीं भेजूँगी, पता नहीं क्या हुआ। और and it was all male boarding as well, so they were kind of, it could be scandalous कि क्यों भागा। So मैं तो home sickness की वजह से भागा था। So by the time I reached home finally, तो I was received and my mother said कि बेटा बस नहीं जाना, कोई मसला नहीं, आपको नहीं भेजेंगे। Within 24 hours they had changed their mind कि नहीं बेटा अब तो आपने उधर ही जाना है, and you have to think of it as a challenge, and वो जो सारी शपील होती है।
So why did they change their mind? वो बस वो ठीक है, वो हो गया कि सेफ है, तो अब उन्होंने कहा कि यार let's get back into
probably, but I think one of the things was that my mother had made an assessment, because my mother comes from Khosa family,
right?
My father comes from a Jat family, so there were a family background mismatch. My mother was very educated. My father, when he married my mother, he was FA, and my mother forced him to complete his law and all of that. He ended up being a great lawyer, but it was a lot of my mother. So my mother thought that it is in my genes not to study, because none of my chachas studied. My mother brought them from village to home. उनको डंडे मार के पढ़ाया, कोई मैट्रिक में भाग गया, कोई एफए में सो.
So for her it wasn't as much of a Hasan Abdal, it was like ये स्कूल से भागा.
Exactly. तो वो उन्होंने जब प्यार मोहब्बत ख़त्म हो गई तो उनको ख्याल आया कि but what is happening?
Yeah.
And I was always a good student. Even my cousins who were in La Salle High School, उनके साथ भी I was ahead of my class. So ऐसा था नहीं कि मैं पढ़ाई छोड़ देता. But my mother, so from that point, even before then I hated boarding. Before that, after that, it was just always marking days on the calendar. अब इतने साल रह गए, इतने साल रह गए. And from that point onwards, you have to find refuge, right? So imagine that in Cadet College, nobody had ran away like this.
Right.
And then if you run away, you're never taken back.
Yeah.
That was the rules.
Yeah.
But because I was a good student, so when I came back, now the principal and all the board sat down and they said कि अब इसका क्या करना है? And then the board made a decision कि नहीं अब इनको हम rehire कर लेते हैं, कोई मसला नहीं. So they violated the policies and then वो मुझे कमरे में जाकर उन्होंने बताया कि भाई आपको इसलिए किया है कि we believe that now you have to make us proud, right? Yeah. So metric का बोर्ड है, FSC का बोर्ड है, आपने अब टॉप करना है. So that kind of had a huge impact कि I feel कि I owe it to everyone now and I hate this place. I can't run away again. I have no other option. So that kind of fundamentally changed me.
Right.
So I became very introvert, and even now I'm inherently introvert, caught in an extrovert body.
Right.
So because of being a manager, you have to show a certain amount of extroversion, and I'm hating every minute of when I'm doing that. So FSC तक जो है ना, this is a history. I'm happy to say that FSC में फिर board में position आई and all of that was forgotten. But still to date, I carry
that burden,
ambivalent feeling about that.
Interesting. Where did you go after FSC, Hasan Abdal?
So after FSC,
and you didn't think of joining the army? I mean, Hasan Abdal is like the ultimate breeding ground for army officers.
Right. So I hated every moment of it. So I could not see myself joining the army. और फिर उसके बाद that was the time जो आपने पहले before the talk when you asked me. So उस वक्त IT वगैरह कुछ नहीं था. Engineering की there was only UET. And your elder brothers, they would still be younger than me, but maybe you would know. So, उस वक्त UET Lahore में it would take 7 years to complete your engineering,
right?
And that was just too long a time. So at that time, what happened was there was no other place, right? So I was conflicted, and my parents had given me full independence. कि बेटा जो करना है. So एक दफ़ा ज़बरदस्ती की Cadet College जो करना है करो. So I thought I would do CSS. I thought maybe I will do commerce. उस वक्त होता ये था कि FSC when you graduate you have a whole year before UET classes start.
अच्छा.
So I dabbled in all. I took admission in government college because I wanted to do CSS and took double maths, physics and all of that. So even attended few classes. But when UET started, I just ended up joining UET in electrical engineering, and that was when GIK also started off.
So GIK as an institution
started off. So UET classes started in March. GIK started in around September.
93?
93, exactly. Right. So that's when then me and few of my friends, they then gave GIK exam. And then we dropped out of UET. And then we were the first batch of GIK.
Which program?
So I started off with there's a program, I don't know if they still offer it, it's called Engineering Sciences. Back then it used to be called Maths and Applied Physics. Okay. So my dream was to be to do PhD in physics.
Achha.
And I hated maths. So nobody told me.
How do you reconcile with that?
Exactly. So I remember growing up, my mother, she's dead now, but she was showing me a book, which was a thick physics book, and I had written my name, Kashif Manzoor, future PhD physics, right? So that's how fascinated I was. So I started off first semester, and then my grades were okay, but I got a B in maths, right? And the rest were all A's. So I talked to some really good teachers over there and sought their advice. And then they suggested that, if that's the situation, you should not pursue maths and applied physics. You should transfer. So because I had good GPA, so I could transfer in electronics and computer science. And at that time, we had no idea that computer science is the future, right? So it was just a toss of a coin. I could have landed here or there. I just flipped. and computer science. I said, computer science it is.
थोड़ा सा उससे पहले, I mean, you're in UET. It's like a legacy school, essentially, right? And suddenly now there's a new institution that's opened up. Sure, I mean, there's this president whose name is attached to it, so there might be some prestige.
Right.
Wow. How did that decision happen? Was it the 7-year program versus the 4-year program? या लाहौर से निकलना था?
Right. So during that, there's another thing. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to say it here, but I'll still say it and you can cut it. जब वो साल था ना UET का, 7 years was always a deal breaker, right? You have to understand, I'm thinking of doing PhD. And it takes 7 years or 6 years to do PhD. And here I have to spend this much time. So I tried few other institutions. At that time, GIK, we did not know it is going to open up. So EME was, which is now NAST, right? So EME was the next option. So I applied to EME. And I was rejected. So I was in FSC Pindi board, I was the top student. So it was like, of course I would be accepted. So when I was rejected, I found out and then I was crying, I was unhappy, and my father said, okay, calm down. Let me go and talk to EME. So my father drove. Someone told me to write a very emotional letter. So I typewritten, signed it, and advisor said, you don't take the kid because I don't know what's going to happen. And he's very sensitive. So my father took the letter, went, and there was a colonel over there who was in charge of all of this. And my father said, why would you reject this guy? And he said, well, the reason is because we have certain quotas, right? If he come as a gentleman cadet, then it's fine. But I didn't want to be gentleman cadet. Then you have private seats. And private seats, unsaid rule was, it is meant for army officer sons who could not get anywhere else.
Right.
And he said, your son is a UET merit, so why do you want to waste someone else's? So that was the situation of, lack of meritocracy at that time. So then, you're right, GIK was the other only option, 4 years. And because my parents were like, had given me full independence, and now we had to make a decision because GIK was supposed to be private, more expensive, UIT, hardly any fees. So me and another friend of mine, who incidentally was the same friend who saw me off when I jumped off the wall, we actually went and said, let's take a look at GIK, right? So here we are going on a bus, and we could not find a bus that would take us to GIK. It was so unknown. So we looked up the address of Soprist, which was the organization that was running the fair. We found their address in F8. We went there, just literally knocked on the door. And at that time, a lot of GIK's initial administration, they used to sit in Soprist office because GIK was still under construction. So over there, we met some really good people. We explained our problems to them, and they kind of convinced us, don't worry, this is the place you need to be. And they also guided us how to go to GIK. So they just said that there is a पिंडी में वो जो एक वैगन स्टेशन है फैज़ाबाद में, वहाँ पे जाएं, फलां अड्डे पे जाएं, वो सफ़ेद रंग की वैगन होगी जिस पे लिखा होगा 2GIK, उसमें बैठें, and you have to be back before 5 because
otherwise you're stuck there.
Was stuck there. Went there. So the architecture is beautiful. I think it was designed by a French or Turkish architect. Really beautiful. So we went there. It was just so much hospitality you feel over there. Because KPK, they're well known for their hospitality. So you feel like you were welcomed over there. Compare that with UET, जहाँ पे हमने अप्लाई किया तो वो जमात के जो होते थे वो लोग, तो उन्होंने हमारी डिग्रियाँ ही छुपा ली और फिर पैसे दे के हमने डिग्री ली. So compare that. So, there was no brainer for us.
Right. And so how was the 4 years at GIK, computer science? I mean, you were the first batch there.
Right.
This is a very nascent time. Computer science, किसी को पता ही नहीं है.
Right.
ज़ाहिर है, economically we're not very strong. And so getting these super expensive machines, जिसका कोई future है कि नहीं,
right.
क्या scene है.
Right.
So what was it like at the time?
Right. So I think everyone who joined GIK at that time, क्योंकि स्टैंडर्ड तो हाई था, पहला बैच था, they were all people who had options elsewhere as well. A lot of them from UET dropouts like me. A lot of them had options to go to US, one reason or another, financial or whatever. They chose to be at GIK. So no one was at GIK because that was the only place they could get in.
Right.
They made some convoluted decisions to be in a place which is so far away from civilization.
Yeah.
And take a risk. Right. So everyone was extremely unique. And this also goes for teachers also.
And they were smart people. They weren't like rejects.
They were no. They were not rejects. They were smart, and obviously someone had a certain type of smartness more than other. But they were a very unique bunch, and at that time it is very hard for anyone to imagine now what was situation over there back then, because you had one canteen and it had limited supplies. And if you want to eat something, you have to go into the bazaar. Right, and it's not like Uber or Careem or anything, and you've got to figure it out. You go over there. They have not seen people from the other side of Pakistan either, right? So those were very exciting times. Not for the reasons that now kids go to LUMS or FAST or all of that. They find excitement in beautiful buildings and all of that. I think we found excitement in the fact that you feel that you're pioneering something.
Yeah.
Right. And at that age, idealism and everything, the teachers that we were getting all were idealistic.
Yeah.
Right. Someone had
10-12-15 साल गुजर जाते हैं ना तो बस टीचर्स साइकिल चला रहे होते हैं.
Exactly.
I feel like वो time होगा when the teachers are passionate, the students are passionate,
Right,
and now
right.
suddenly you've put them away from civilization,
Right.
and just given them the independence to really do whatever they want to do.
Right. Absolutely. So that was a great experience. And at that time we were living like kings because it was all hostel and only 150 kids, and 2 hostel or 3 hostels were built in. So we all had a separate room, attached bath, right? So it was like even better than home in some ways, right? And no checks and balances. And so everyone had very fond memories of those times.
Right. You graduated in 97?
97.
And so straight out, what were you doing?
So after 97, so people who had proper guidance from their elder brothers or parents, or people whose parents were well off, 1 year before graduation, they had already given GREs and everyone was going abroad, right? So I have, one of the downside of being away from your parents and them giving you full independence is that I just simply did not want to burden my parents, even with admission fee or anything, right? So I knew I would eventually go abroad. But I didn't want to ask my father for money, right? So I didn't do any GREs because I like with Tariq bin Ziyad ki tarah kashtiyan chalana, right? So I said, agar GRE de diya to phir ho jayega, phir parents bichare they'll be guilty, ko zameen bechenge, kuch karenge, so dena hi nahi hai. So out of 97, that is the time when IT is picking up, right? So there were so many jobs available. And my goal was, what is the quickest way, legal and quickest way to be rich? So I can support myself for masters, right? So at that time, although I had joined a small company, but that was a filler in Lahore. I'm figuring it out. So Schlumberger, it's a French oil company. They would do interviews and they would select 2 to 4 people from Pakistan every year. So I was lucky that, so at that time, because GIK had now become a brand name, so a lot of these companies, they were reaching out to our career office and asking top resumes, and they would just give us a call and interview.
And what was this job? Was it IT or was it more like a graduate
So
program?
Schlumberger has multiple businesses. So the one which is the more electronics oriented job, that's called wireline and testing, and that's where the real money is. So I was selected in that. So the job was, not so much like we were not digging oils, but once the oil has been dug up, sophisticated equipments have to be lowered in, and then you find out if there's oil or not. And so we were the ones loading the equipment and running the computers, analyzing the data.
So you were actually like traveling to these sites, and,
yes.
And that must have been quite an experience.
Yeah, at that time, I think we were, and remember, I had never been abroad at that time, right? So the first time I landed, so when they sign a contract, they actually fly you over to Dubai.
Okay.
And they give you 5 days and $1,000 to make up your mind whether you want to join or not. So they don't want to take you in without you getting a feel of what you're signing up for.
Right.
So the first time I landed in UAE, I realized that, everywhere dirt is the same, right? So we were not used to that. So at that time, we signed off, and some of the students were actually so sure of themselves that they took the $1,000, partied for 5 days, and decided not to join, right? So, that's how they were. But obviously, we were morally obligated. We joined that. And after that, what they do is that they then send you for 1 month to work as an operator.
Okay.
Right?
What's an
Operator is like cleaning floors and all of that. So once you're an engineer,
So they really break you down first.
Exactly. So they have certain locations. You go over there. So I worked in Indonesia, and after one month, then they send you for a training school, right? So my first month was in Qatar, where I was working as an operator, and then they because my English was good, so they sent me to the England school, but I could not get visa in time. So then they rerouted me to Indonesia. So spent around 4 months in Indonesia in training school, graduated from there, and then went back to Qatar as an engineer. So total number of years was like 3 years while I was doing that, and made good money.
And were you able to visit your family back home during that time?
Yes. So the deal was that every 2.5 months, then they give you all expense paid 2 to 4 weeks of time off. Right. And you can go anywhere in the world. Right. And I being, mama's boy, I would always come to Pakistan. So yeah, they're very well taken care of. And when I decided to leave that job, it was because the goal was never, working.
Get comfortable and make money. It was
the idea was to go master's, PhD, whatever. Right.
And so immediately after that, did you go for your master's?
So immediately after that, being the only son, I thought, now first let me get married. Right. So got married and had a kid, and then started preparing. And at that time, I had joined Techlogix because I left Schlumberger, came back, have to join somewhere. And so joined Techlogix, and then they sent me to China. And over there, I took my mother along with me to China. By then, I had a son as well. So worked there. And then prepared for my GRE and the whole process.
Why China though? I mean, that's very, very unique. If you're in the IT space, one would assume.
Right.
मैंने आज तक कभी किसी से बात नहीं की जो चाइना में, like generally होता है कि जी हमारे नॉर्थ अमेरिका में clients हैं, मिडिल ईस्ट में हैं. This is very new. So tell me a little bit about what that was.
Right. And this is the China of 2003. And this is pre-Chinese Olympic, right? So this is the China where very few people would go. And when we landed in Beijing, we were truly treated as foreigners, right? So because our eyes and face looked different, and my son was very cute and young, so people would actually take selfies with him, right? So it's a different China. It's a very, very good question. So at that time, 9/11 had happened, right? So there was a lot of negative perception about Pakistan. A lot of Pakistan IT companies had customers in the US, and they were finding it challenging. So the Techlogix's largest customer was General Electric. We're making multi-million annual revenue. So our sponsors over there suggested that there's going to be a corporate decision taken, no business with Pakistan, so you might open an offshore center in China. So that offer to help set up the offshore center was made to people much smarter and senior than me. But all of them were very smart. So because this is not that China, right? So nobody kind of opted for it. And then, so I was like a reluctant third or fourth best choice because I was fairly young, no experience of setting up offices, and that also in China. Because I've been taking these ridiculous decisions all my life, Cadet College and then GIK, and then so it's in my nature to kind of not go where everyone is going. So I just thought it as an opportunity.
Right. And what was your role at Techlogix when you joined?
So I was heading the China office.
No, before that.
Before that, I was the director of professional services. So pretty much, running projects and dealing with customers.
So now you're in China. And which city did you go into?
I was in Beijing. And I had also learned Chinese. We did a 2 months course in Pakistan. And again, being a nerd, I would memorize vocabulary, and I would spend day and night, and I would practice the accent. So when we landed in China, at that time, very few people spoke English. So you really need to know Chinese to move around. And so I could move around, had a little bit of vocabulary. And what was funny was that in Chinese, when you tell someone that, I don't know Chinese, right? If you say it in Chinese, that never works out well, right? Because they think you're making fun of them, right? So, and then I would not say that, so even now I remember if you say, I don't know Chinese, you say, wa bu he chong wan, right? Which means I don't know Chinese. And my Chinese colleague, when I would say this, he said, "Don't say this. Now he's talking to me and saying this foreigner is making fun of me," and because I had practiced the accent so well. So then I started saying wa hoi idian chongwan, which means I know very little Chinese, right?
Right.
And then their response was, "Oh no, your Chinese is very good. Keep speaking." Right? So there was no easy way out. So learn
It's very
Chinese.
interesting though. Have you been practicing since then? Because your
not
accent
really.
is phenomenal.
No, not really. So that's one thing that we have to understand about almost everything that is Chinese. Everything in China is very logical, right? Even their language, it's like maths. It flows like maths. So you know the basics. The rest is only adding to your vocabulary. The grammar is very simple, right? So even now I remember these things because
it's the problem-solving mind that you have that
Yeah.
just sort of does the same thing with that as well. Very
Exactly.
cool. So you were in Beijing, and now you're hiring Chinese people with very little Chinese.
So an interesting incident about hiring. So at that time, we were looking at Microsoft questions, right? So Microsoft has the analytical questions. Because of language, we were hiring people who could speak English. But psychologically, we were rejecting individuals just because their English wasn't good. Although we knew
They were smart.
They're smart. So how do you interview people? Because my job was mostly personality interviews, right? And I don't know personality of Chinese people, so I was struggling to find the right mix. And so I looked at Microsoft. I realized that they asked certain questions, and one of the famous questions was, "Why are manholes round?" Right? And there are 3-4 correct answers to it. One is because you can, if you want to take it out, you can roll it. Another one is the round will not fall down. Typical question answers. So I said, okay, here's a good question. So I started asking those questions, and I didn't realize they don't know what manhole is, right? So when you say it in English, that why are manhole round, then, and you might want to censor it later on.
I'm finally there.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Took me a second there.
and then I so I realized I shouldn't be asking this question because people are thinking I'm being obnoxious. But we eventually figured out. We hired a very good team. A lot of them stuck around with Techlogix for many years.
Mm-hmm. How big was Techlogix?
At that time, Techlogix was like the company to be in. Their co-founders were both MIT graduates.
Pakistani?
Both Kivan and Salman. They're still around, still running the company. And at that time, I think when I eventually left, they were like $12 million annual revenue. And I suspect they might be still the same. So the growth hasn't happened the way, back in those days it was happening. So in China, the main purpose always was to go abroad and fund my education. So at that time, I had done GRE, I scored well, and I was ready. So I applied, got into really good schools, and got funding as well. So at that time, then I said, I wanted to take. I took 2 years off sabbatical from Techlogix because I believed in the vision, right? So I never thought that it was ever about me having a comfortable job, right? Everyone can do that, right? But I wanted it to be something bigger. And I thought that Techlogix, these really brilliant, idealist people gave up everything in .com era, came back, doing country a great favor. And obviously I want to, be their mentee and then play my part, right? So that was always the idea. And so once I did my master's from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
How was that, by the way?
So that was, I had 2 kids by that time, right? And I was a nerd all along. So in GIK, when I graduated, I wanted, I'm a very, idiotically focused on grades, right? So in GIK, I said, okay, I will be the first student. But I didn't realize that everyone else is smart, very, very smart as well. So I ended up being the 3rd student overall and 2nd in computer science. So with masters, my goal was to, yes, graduate studies, but I also said, well, I've never had 4 GPA, right? Always like 3.9 and whatever, and cumulative GPA was obviously not 4. I said, okay, I have to get 4 GPA. So masters ended up being something I could have literally enjoyed, to being something which was 50% enjoyment, 50% was just mindless grind.
Anxiety.
Because I need 4 GPA.
Yeah.
in the end, I ended up with 4 GPA, and the benefit was that I got fellowship and all of that, which was all academically based. But I did not spend a lot of time with my family. I was spending most of my nights in the library, and also remember that I had taken 7 years working break. So I was working for 7 years, so I was away from academics, and then suddenly I landed in a school which was very tough, and now I had to remember what I studied in undergrad. So part of that was necessity. I had to quickly like do double or triple what everyone else was doing. And so first semester was tough, and then I did my thesis and all of that. So at that time I realized I could also do PhD. But at that time, my mother also was suffering from Parkinsonism and only son, and every day I was getting calls from my home. And you're married as well, right? So there's always this thing that parents with single kid have, that biwi nikal ke na le jaye, right? So you have that social pressure. So came back and then rejoined Techlogix.
Right. कितने से तक रहे हैं टेक्लॉजिक्स में उसके बाद? व्हाट डिड यू जॉइन टेक्लॉजिक्स?
टेक्लॉजिक्स में फिर I was director professional services, resumed there, but then I left after 1.5 years because at that time I had the necessary exposure to reach certain conclusion, because the idea always was let's do something big. And very early in my life I realized I am no entrepreneur. So I needed to be part of a team where I focus on service excellence and others are focusing on other areas. So once I had the exposure, I came back, I realized that Techlogix had made certain decision which was evident to me that they are not going to be a $1 billion Pakistani company, right?
Right.
And then I said, well, it's time for me to get it. And while I was reaching that conclusion, I was also doubting myself. But who am I to reach this conclusion? What data points do I have? I have never worked in a large IT company. I don't even know how it feels. So then I said, okay, let me make a strategic move to a larger company and get a feeling of how those companies operate. And then come back and then be part of a group, even if it is Techlogix, I can rejoin, where I would know how scale looks like and then do my part to scale.
Right. And what year is this now?
This is 2008.
And
November.
now you've moved to Oracle.
So I moved to Oracle in Asia Pacific. So I did projects in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, South Korea, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia. So Asia Pacific. Tons of travel. So I took my family with me, and because I had made a lot of decisions based on being with my mother. And again, she's not getting any younger, and her situation is deteriorating. So I knew that I have X number of years, because the last thing I wanted to do, or I would recommend anyone to do it, is to be with your parents and be bitter about it, right? So you have to make a decision, and I made a decision that if I'm willing to make career sacrifices up to a limit that does not make me bitter. Right. By taking care of my parents. So that was the time I realized my mother could last for another few years without me completely being with her. My sister was nearby as well. So, sorry. So that's where I then made this decision. I took my wife and my 2 kids with me, and we were based out of Malaysia, but I was traveling all around. And finally, my wife said that, you're never here, so why are we here? Because Malaysia is not a. So we were in Kuala Lumpur, but
not a very conducive place for foreigners.
Yeah, the driving was crazy, right? And my wife could drive, but she could not survive in Kuala Lumpur. So and then certain other medical situations happened with the wife that we thought that it is best that she comes back to Pakistan. And because our ancestral house is in Multan, my Susral is in Multan as well. So she chose to come back. And hats off to her, because she chose to be with my mother, whereas she could just be living with her mother. Houses are close by. And I did not put any compulsion on her, because it's my mother, my responsibility, not hers.
Right.
But she made this call, and so she moved back after around 2 years, and I stayed back for another 3 years in Oracle traveling, And every 3 months, my boss was kind enough to give me like 2 weeks to work from Pakistan. And this is way before COVID and work-life balance and all of that. So it wasn't fashionable
it wasn't
to work
easy.
from.
It wasn't
It
easy.
wasn't easy.
And I mean, your kids must be what, like 8, 9,
Right.
10
So
at the time.
my eldest one at that time was So he was in grade 6.
Oh, that must be difficult.
Yeah. And youngest one had just started in KG or grade 1. So I was traveling. My wife was taking care of my mother and my kids. And then once I completed 5 years, then I said, that is it. Right. So now at that time,
And what year was this when you finally?
So that was in December 2013.
Okay.
Right. And because I had made 2 prior attempts to move back to Pakistan and things didn't work out ideally. So I knew this time, what were the loose ends. So I tightened all the loose ends. And then I came back and I knew that this is going to be for good. And at that time, Systems was still a company, but it wasn't clear where they're heading, right? I mean, yes, as Asaf, everyone knew in the industry, Asif Peer was very well respected and all of that. But it wasn't clear that they're ever going to be a 1 billion company, let alone even have aspirations to be that, right?
Right. It's just a company that's just working, काम चल रहा है, पैसे बन रहे हैं, चलाते रहो, घुमाते रहो, जिंदगी जीते रहो.
Exactly. So Techlogix was never an option. I'd given up hope on Techlogix. So then so I now knew how larger organizations work, right? Because being in Oracle, I've seen it. So I joined a smaller company called Confiz. It was co-founded by one LUMS graduate and one his professor.
And Confiz has had a phenomenal growth as well, by the way.
So when I joined, the revenue was around 1.5 million. Right. So, and when I left, it was 25 million, right? And obviously,
this is dollars, right?
This is dollar, right? So,
and how many years is this?
So I worked at Confiz for almost 8 years.
8 years,
right?
So that's your biggest probably
tenure in any
organization, and that's quite a lot of growth,
right? And at that time, we got luck has to play a part. Right. But then it's team and all those, these sound trite and cliched, but this is actually true. Everyone plays a role. And I think I obviously played a role, but the CEO of Confiz is also CEO and co-founder of Park Wheels. Right. He's a serial entrepreneur. So he's a products guy, startup guy, entrepreneur guy, and he's running this services business, which was funding his investment.
Toys.
Exactly. So he was kind enough to let me run the show.
And you were essentially heading that division, that entire services division.
Yes, not just the services, then the US and all of it. So the CEO, I would say, he was a help, but I would say what you would like over here, what Asif Peer does, the CEO over there was maybe doing 20% of that.
Right.
And that was always understood by me. So the remaining 80%, some I would foot the burden. Some another gentleman was there, chief operating officer, we would. And so that finishes 8 years there. And then I had to decide again.
So 8 years. So now it's 2021?
Now it's 2021.
Okay.
And so now going back to, you're mid-40s plus and you have to now think.
You really have to think. Like that's where you're like, okay, मैंने कुछ aspirations पहले थी, अब वो एक realignment आती है stage में हमेशा कि यार मैं चाहता क्या हूँ जिंदगी के साथ.
Exactly. So उसमें एक तो ये हुआ by that time both my parents had passed away.
Right.
So the reason to be in Pakistan was not there.
Right.
And now the reason has to be very mathematical, right? It's not emotional, it's not parents. And what are those reasons? Because we all always have options to go and Neela passport or Sabaz passport ke alawa sare hum mil sakte hain. And then you have to decide, right?
Yeah.
So I did, so I've never been good at maths, but I did maths. So I said, okay, Pakistan IT industry mein, what is it that Pakistan IT industry really needs? And I I looked at across the border how Indian IT industry have grown and all of that. And I decided that, or I speculated that I think that we need a very large IT services company. We don't have any. Right. Even Sri Lankan expats have created $1 billion plus. Vietnamese have. And look at their population, look at our population.
Philippines, Indonesia.
Exactly. We all have, right?
Yeah.
So it is doable. And So I said, okay, now I can't build that company, right?
Yeah.
Too late, not an entrepreneur. And I think by 60, I would be done for, right? So I have another 13 years. By that time, I was 47. And so if by 60, I am contributing in a company that's $1 billion, and you assume a 30-40% CAGR, then आज क्या उसका revenue होना चाहिए?
Right.
So they did the maths and realized Confiz is not going to be that company, right? So then where does this leave me? Right? So, and that's when Asif Akram, I actually reached out to systems. There was other thing which for confidentiality reason I can't share, but there was a talk. There were talks between me and Confiz and systems and me and Asif Akram and all.
Just really figuring out what the next step should be for you.
Right. So Asif Akram, I saw them, although he's older than me, but not by a huge margin.
Yeah.
But I thought that he has the right exposure, experience, and why don't I look for a mentor in local industry and then see where it goes. At that time, there was no intention that system mein aa jana hai, right? I was just looking for a mentor. And later on, when I started reading how Silicon Valley works, I realized that a lot of Silicon Valley CEOs and C-level executives, they can't operate without a mentor. So there are actually paid mentors you can get who are professional at it. And then you have people like Bill Campbell, the $1 trillion coach. He was coach for Steve Jobs. And although Jeff Bezos does not acknowledge that, but the rumor is he also coached him and continues to do that. So you name any, Eric Schmidt was coached by him. It's not fashionable in Pakistan because there aren't any mentors available. Right? So I was just looking for a mentor to provide me some guidance. Ran into Asif Akram, started meeting him, found him to be a great mentor. So we would have these intellectual back and forth discussions, culture, values in Pakistan and all of that. As you know, he had come back for his mother
Family.
as well.
I mean, there's a lot of themes, even from as far back as going to a convent school essentially.
Right.
There are a lot of themes that are intersect.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's when we started talking, right? So it took me 1.5 years to assess how serious systems is about their growth, and am I even going to be a good fit culturally and otherwise. And finally, once I decided that that's the way to go, then I had a talk with my CEO. We worked out a transition plan. So it was around 6 months of transition. Made sure that Confiz itself is stable, would not have a lot of impact without me, and then made the move. So I joined Systems back in November 2021.
Right. Okay. So now we're going to move the conversation a little bit towards systems.
Sure.
And one of the things that this is the second conversation that we're having here. We're going to be having a conversation with Asif Peer as well. He's like the systems sort of veteran.
Right.
But the two conversations that I've had are both essentially relatively recent hires, right? And so one of the things that I'm seeing is even when I look back at the stock price, there was this sort of stable sort of wheels turning, everything happening. And that was your economy as well. Up until 2018, you had a certain amount of वो डॉलर कंट्रोल हुआ था, वो एक्सपोर्ट बेस्ड सर्विसेज बिजनेस को वैसे चोक करके बैठा हुआ था, बिजली के मसले हैं, सिक्योरिटी के मसले हैं, एंड लॉट ऑफ दोज वेरिएबल्स हैड बीन सॉल्व्ड मोर और लेस बाय 2018. द ओनली थिंग वाज द यूनिट इकोनॉमिक्स जो कि डॉलर से फिक्स हो गई थी. एंड सो वी आर बिगिनिंग टू नाउ सी के सिस्टम्स अब देख रहा है, कह रहा है यार चलो ठीक है, मार्जिन आया, वो जो है ना डॉलर की वजह से आया, किसी वजह से आया, बट सडनली नाउ वी हैव स्पेस फॉर ग्रोथ. And then COVID hits,
right?
And suddenly both the stock prices they go sky high, and then government की तरफ से policy, ये मैं देख रहा हूँ as an outsider, right? So government की तरफ से policy आ रही है, सुनने में आ रहा है STZA आ रहा है, STZA partner करता है, systems की buildings खड़ी हो रही हैं. So I was in Teradata back in 2016, and उस time के ऊपर होता था Teradata IBM,
right?
And you'd flip flop, and आपको तनख्वाह बढ़ानी है ना, तो 2 साल अगर IBM चले जाए फिर वापस आ जाना,
right?
And suddenly 2020 happens, and every single friend of mine that I know in Teradata or in this space, छोटी सी इंडस्ट्री होती है, हर किसी को आप जानती हैं, everybody you pick up a call and like यार systems निकल गए,
right?
And I'm scratching my head and saying what the hell's going on here,
right?
But there is something that's happened, and it's very recent, and the vision's really changed,
right?
And I correlate that with a lot of the talking points that I'm hearing from the government as well, which is saying, okay, $50 billion, $15 billion in like whatever amount of years, and tax reforms, tax breaks, and all of these things. So tell me a little bit about what's really going on here, both within systems in terms of what changed,
Right.
and secondly, in terms of the ecosystem, because it's not just systems now anymore, it's a gold rush where every IT company is just talking about, कि भाई हमने अब ये बनना है और हमने वो बनना है. So what's really going on here?
Right. So obviously, I haven't been an insider in system for that long. When you talk to Asif Pir, you'll get a better picture of it. But I can talk more in terms of general IT, what happened, and I can speculate the same happened with systems as well. But in systems, it happened much better and in a far more lucrative way than other companies. So if you look at IT history, right? It's IT services is a very human intensive thing, right? So what exactly is that IT services industry do? We monetize people,
Right.
That's it. So there's a very direct correlation between the number of people you have and the revenue you can pump out.
I mean, there's a head count, there's billability, and there's just very basic equation right there.
Exactly, absolutely. So selling became easy during COVID, right? So if you have the rest of the variables in the equations already figured out, and you're struggling because abroad you can't sell more, then with COVID, what happened was, first of all, every industry was shell-shocked, right? So the first few months, if you look at even Pakistani companies, even Keep Trucking and NBS and others, there was a round of layoffs, right? System didn't do that. And a lot of other companies did not do that, because after a few months, then people realize that, you can't close the business. So your business becomes e-commerce, connectivity and all of that. And a lot of companies who had deferred or deprioritized spending on IT, suddenly it becomes top of their priority list.
Right.
So now here you have, and you can't just, it's not like oil, you turn on the tap and you match the supply-demand deficit. It's people you're talking about. So you can't just turn on the tap and suddenly start having more people churned out, right? So that's why everyone was struggling to find the resources. And here you are in Pakistan, where although you talked about IBM and Teradata, and not to criticize them, I'm sure they have their own realities. But if you look at how long they have been in Pakistan, and you compare that with their offshore centers in Vietnam and other countries, and look at our population and quality of our talent, I mean, it is inexplicable why you aren't that big in Pakistan. So because of security, because of a lot of other things, these large organizations, they want to play it safe, right? So it was risky to expand in Pakistan. So here you have, and obviously now the H1 visas are also choked in and all of that. So here you have pent up amazing talent. University qualities had gone up, number of graduates had gone up, and suddenly the sales opportunities, they skyrocketed. So which is the country which is ideally placed to benefit from it? It's Pakistan. And there aren't any companies who have offshore centers here in Pakistan. So system was already bigger at that time. They were enlisted. And once you do an IPO, the maturity of your top management is forced to go up, because otherwise stock market will hammer you.
Right.
And then on top of it, you have people like Izaz Saab and Arshad, who are veteran, who have seen many ups and downs. I mean, there have been time Y2K happened and system was flushed with money, and then that stopped, and then you're struggling to meet the payroll, right? So that's seen ups and downs. So things were like stars were lined up for systems to do better. They had people like Asif Pir who were at that age and that exposure where they could see an opportunity, and they had the right mentoring through Arshad and Izaz to actually really go aggressive on it. Other IT companies, I think they were less well placed to benefit from it, because now that you can cash in a lot of business, suddenly you have an opportunity to scale up, but you don't know how to scale, right? You look at RBSoft and Confiz and all these companies, they're made by founders who are also the CEOs. That was for most of them, that's their first job.
Yeah.
So you don't even know how to scale.
So the business aspect is just missing over there, right? Like they know how to sell the service.
Right.
But they get stuck in this sort of local maxima and are unable to go beyond that. वो 50 बंदे की team, 100 बंदे की team, and we are unable to find that Tata Consulting out of it.
Exactly.
That's been missing.
और अगर आप let's compare with TCS, what we were talking about earlier is, so there is this business sense, right? And those 20 families of Pakistan who are in so many businesses, they have that sense. But they're addicted to safe businesses. So they will open up an IPP, dollar guaranteed dollar profit. They'll buy a bank. They'll open up Kia and whatnot, right? Because they see. So they want immediate benefits, but they have not invested in IT. They have not opened up an IT services company. It is hard. It is human-intensive business. So that means that people like, LUMS graduates and GIK and FAST graduates who have the passion to do something for the country, they are left to open up those businesses. And they have done good enough job, but they don't have that
muscle to scale.
That muscle,
or the experience
exposure,
as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And I think system was ideally placed because they were already at the place where like they had in their board, they had our ex FPR chief Shabar Zaidi. That's one of our board members.
There's an institutional memory there as well, right? 1979. That's a long time ago. If I remember this correctly.
Right. And 77. That's the name of the studio. 77.
Right. And that's, I mean, हम तो IT को कहते हैं 90s में आपने computer science क्यों पढ़ा? There's an IT company that goes far back, and so they know ये जो आपके ups and downs वाली बात है. Definitely much better placed than a lot of other folks who are looking to scale.
And also remember one thing. COVID से पहले जो IT का bubble था mid 1990s onward, Pakistan IT industry rode that as well. Right. But the impact was hardly noticeable.
Right.
Now the impact is noticeable. We are making a really loud statement at an international level. Why did that happen? Right? If you look at the amount of money poured into IT from 1995 to 2001, that was far more in dollar terms or inflation ko kar lein than what was poured in now. So usme meri speculation ye hai कि a lot of things have to happen for you to capitalize on an opportunity. The first batch of FAST, I think it came out in 95 or 96, and I think Asif Peer might be from that batch, right? उससे पहले तो UETs होते थे ना, right? So UET में computer science तो होता ही नहीं था, right? So it's no coincidence. और मर्द को तो अकल 40 साल के बाद आती है. So it's no coincidence that people who graduate in 95 are now in key positions in a lot of these organizations. They have the maturity, the exposure. At the same time, they're not lethargic. They're still young enough to do something.
Right.
So that is one of the reasons why Pakistan was slightly better placed to capitalize on this. And we are very cognizant of the fact the party is not going to last for too long. Although it's not going to be like a bubble that will burst, it's not going to be like that because इसके fundamentals are different है. लेकिन ये जिस तरह से है ना कि there's just so much work and supply demand का एक ऐसा वो हो गया है, this is going to go away soon enough, right? Probably in a couple of years, because the reason is.
What do you think about ये जो बात है कि यार 5G आएगा, is going to add like 1 trillion minimum into the global economy, and so essentially that's new opportunity.
Right.
या वही वाली बात है कि meta world की दुनिया आ रही है, and that's going to really sort of create new opportunities within the digital space. So while we can say कि okay BPO चला गया सारा इंडिया, तो वहाँ हम और नहीं growth ला सकते, या data even AI and वो सारी उस wave में हम कर लेंगे जितना कर लेंगे. Do you think कि नई space बनना ही रुक जाएगी, या do you think कि
देखिए उसमें let's differentiate.
Okay.
The bubbles जो उस वक्त .com का bubble था जिसको एलन ग्रीनस्पैन कहता था irrational exuberance. That was bubble because it was not based on common sense, right? So people paying millions of dollars to buy an NFT, that's a bubble. So that's not going to last. But at the same time, internet revolution was happening.
Right.
And then when Steve Jobs introduced smartphones, right, then that wasn't a bubble. That's a revolution.
So you're essentially saying that change is always going to happen. Right. Maybe the rate of change might just go back to the fundamentals and say, okay, slowly and steadily, rather than just this expectation that 2 years mein paisa double.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So metaverse, I see that's definitely
a future.
That's not a bubble. That's a lot of technologies have evolved to a point where metaverse is now possible, right? So आप अगर distributed ledger technology की बात करें तो blockchain है, तो उसमें I think digital currency is one of the use cases.
Right.
But DAOs जो हैं, that's another use case. So those are here to stay, and there will be a lot of IT services
Growth,
work
yeah.
around them.
Right.
So I think so what's going to happen is, because there was a lot of demand and supply was struggling to catch up, larger organizations and smart organizations will never say no to the business, right? But so what you end up doing is you end up kind of using mediocre or below average resources to do that work. So now that this will stabilize, the deficit will stabilize, I think companies that actually focus on excellence, they will continue to win more business. And those companies that have tried to piggyback this wave, they will be replaced. And that's what we're already seeing. A lot of work that we get in the US are actually, cannibalizing is not the right word, but because customer is disillusioned by their existing vendor.
Right.
And they're looking for a better option. And because of the tremendous talent pool that we have in Pakistan, and System being a brand company, a lot of talent is attracted. So we are in a better position to provide high quality talent and get business away from other competitors, which are already multi-billion-dollar companies, right?
Right.
So I think with System, that trend will inshallah continue to happen. 1.5-2 साल में ये जो irrational exuberance है, like everyone is signing up e-commerce, and अभी पाकिस्तान में भी देख लें startups हैं, how many companies do delivery, right? And what are their niche, right? So in the end, 1 or 2 will survive, others will go away.
Right.
You have seen the Careem impact bought by Uber. So जो ये M&A इस तरह की चीज़ें होंगी जिसकी वजह से जो थोड़ी hype create हुई हुई है of demand, that will stabilize. And then companies who truly believe in engineering excellence, I think they will inshallah have a very good future ahead.
Bright future. The 2 questions particularly मैं इस point पे मेरे दिमाग में आते हैं. पहला तो ये कि again जो international companies और पाकिस्तानी companies, उसमें एक थोड़ा सा फ़र्क है in terms of processes, in terms of culture. And culture को मैं उठाऊँगा क्योंकि इस टाइम पे ये होना शुरू हुआ कि अगेन डिमांड बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग थी, तो सप्लाई साइड क्योंकि चौक हुई भी थी, तो आपके पास जहाँ पर शायद आपको 8 बंदे चाहिए होते, वहाँ पर अभी 4 बंदे कर रहे थे. एंड सो लॉट ऑफ कंपनीज, लॉट ऑफ रिसोर्सेज फ्रॉम विद इन दीज कंपनीज हैव दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ वो कि यार क्रेजी हुआ है, रातों को 1-1 बजे भी काम कर रहे हैं, बस काम करना है. एंड सो मुझे याद है कि जो एक ज़माना था जब हम सुनते थे कि इंडिया में ऐसे होता है, एंड सो अंडरस्टैंडेबली सो कि वो हसलर कल्चर है, और वो हसलर कल्चर जो है वो ग्रोथ फेज़ में यही होगा. स्टार्टअप में भी यही होता है, बड़ी कंपनी से भी यही होता है कि जब वो 1000 से 3500 में जा रहे हैं, 5000 में जा रहे हैं, 10,000 में जा रहे हैं, तो इस वक्त पूरी टॉप टू बॉटम नीड्स टू जस्ट बेसिकली जस्ट फ्यूल दैट पुश. But then are we going to, जब आपने एक्सेलेंस की बात की, तो are we going to go towards better processes, better work-life balance, better stabilized, sustainable work culture? And secondly, मेरा ख्याल है 2 साल हुए हैं, 1000 बंदे से 3500 बंदे पे गया. And so do you think there is this worry, or rather, let's put it this way, there is this cautious optimism that we're growing fast, absolutely, that's amazing, but ये ना हो कि like don't bite more than you can swallow, या इतना ज़्यादा ग्रो कर जाएं कि बाद में सस्टेन करना मुश्किल हो जाए. अगेन इट इज़ ए बिलेबिलिटी बेस्ड मॉडल, एंड सो वही आपने कहा कि अभी बहुत ग्रोथ है, बट दैन सडनली खुदा ना खास्ता जंग हो गई और हो दुनिया में क्या चल रहा है आपको तो समझ भी नहीं आ रहा ना कि यार वाई गाइस वाई.
राइट.
सो कुछ भी अगर फोर्स मेजोर हो जाता है तो सडनली वो फिर सारा का सारा क्रम्बल ना कर जाए. सो इन दोनों में व्हाट डू यू थिंक?
So I think एक तो I was talking to Arshad, who's our group CEO. He was visiting us yesterday. So एक तो वो जो जंग वाली situation, I think we are lucky or unlucky in a way that पाकिस्तान की जंग इंडिया से ही होगी ना, तो वो भी ऑफशोर इंडस्ट्री, हम भी ऑफशोर इंडस्ट्री. तो बट जोक्स असाइड, आई थिंक जो आपने शुरू की बात की थी ना, कल्चर, दिस इज समथिंग दैट आई थिंक एट सिस्टम्स वी हैव अ लॉट ऑफ वर्क टू डू. So one of our head of engineering in US, who was a co-founder of a billion-dollar company, Mindtree, Kamran Uzair, I was talking to him and he said कि यार हमें जो करना है, हमें ये करना है, we have to learn to chew the gum while running, right? So
what do you mean by that?
Now, what that means is nowhere has it ever happened that let's say you realize that I'm growing very fast and I have to fix this. You're not going to stop and fix it and then resume your growth. This is stupid. That will never happen, right?
Right.
So you have to figure out that, okay, this is broken. And then you have to prioritize that, okay, this needs to be top of my priority. I need to fix it while still growing. And that requires a lot of skills to do it. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say you're an employee of systems, and वो जो आप hustle की बात कर रहे थे, you're spending late nights and you're bad mouthing systems to your friend कि यार रातें लगती हैं, आपके parents कह रहे हैं कि stupid company में काम कर लिया है, and you're also kind of disengaged, right? And you're looking for a job elsewhere. But you're the same guy, and if I tell you a few things, and then you tell me, would you still feel the same towards systems, right? So I tell you that, look, in an IT services company, for a single person, the revenue generation for a single person is 50 to 52,000 US dollars annually.
Right.
What that means is, in a country of 22 crore, if systems become a $1 billion revenue company, we'll end up generating more than 20,000 jobs. These are middle class jobs, middle to high middle class jobs. And by doing that, we are not creating 5 or 10 millionaires. We are creating 20,000 middle to upper middle class people, right? Compare that to India, where India has 4 or 5 of their largest companies. Their annual revenue combined is like $60 billion. And this means they have created 1 million jobs. So our jihad, the reason why we are working day and night and all of that is because we are seeing an opportunity and we want to capitalize it to grow that to that level. And if today, if we grow at a 30-35% cumulative annual growth rate, it is going to take us several years to reach there. So now, what you are doing here at Systems by working late night or owning up to your responsibilities is actually creating a huge difference in a country where no one has even dared to create that difference. Since 1947, you look at the textile mills, right? What potential they had and where they are right now, other than Interloop or one or two group, nobody is even thinking of that. So you get addicted to millions of dollars in your pocket and you're thinking about, okay, paisa mil raha hai, 2 million har saal mujhe aa raha hai, so why should I take pain in creating jobs and aspiring to do what Systems is trying to do? Yeah. Now, if you as an employee are given that context, suddenly you start seeing things differently. Suddenly when you are working late night is because while we understand that your work life is imbalanced, we are working on fixing it, right? But we can't just turn the tap down, fix the imbalance right now, because then we missed the opportunity. And this is not something our recipe. This is how the world has grown, right?
I think so. Maybe the problem there is internal comms then.
Exactly. And what structure dictates that internal communication? It's your culture and values. Right now, what we are struggling with is that a lot of the people, not just in system, elsewhere as well, they think of culture and value as a luxury of a company that has peace of mind to now focus on it. And we have seen that cliche, that cliche statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You look at all the Bay Area companies, all the great leaders. For them, without culture and values, they can't build the company, right? Now, if you look at Systems values, it's integrity, innovation, dedication. So we have had a lot of internal discussions where we are saying, well, why is integrity even a value? It's a prerequisite. आप किसी बदमाश को तो hire नहीं करना ना. The job that now we have to do is वो जो internal comm की आप बात कर रहे हैं कि लोगों को एक तो values को हम वो करें जिसमें हम true believe करते हैं. We believe in curiosity, we believe in empathy, we believe in this mission that we are truly trying to do something which is so crazy that a 22 crore आबादी में से किसी ने आज तक किया ही नहीं है.
It's going to fundamentally change the way that essentially business is run in Pakistan.
और आप ये देखें कि अगर आप ये करने लगे हैं, वो जो होता है ना कि you get people who know what's around the corner, पाकिस्तान में वो है ही नहीं ना टैलेंट, राइट? ब्रेन ड्रेन की वजह से वो तो गूगल और फेसबुक और वहाँ पे बैठे हुए ना. सो पाकिस्तान की जो रियलिटीज़ हैं वो पाकिस्तानियों को ही पता है, और वो पाकिस्तानी वो अभी खुद 40s मिड 40s में हैं. दे हैवंट स्केल्ड एनीथिंग देमसेल्व्स. सो लॉट ऑफ अस आर स्ट्रगलिंग एंड लर्निंग ऑन द जॉब, बट स्टिल वी हैवंट टेकन द ईजी वे आउट, विच इज़ कि यार 15 मिलियन 22 मिलियन 20 मिलियन से नीचे की कंपनी बना लेते हैं, अपने भी पैसे बना लेते हैं. सो व्हेन वी नीड व्हाट वी नीड टू डू इज टेल आवर पीपल दिस इज व्हाट वी आर डूइंग, राइट. अगर आप स्टार्टअप से इसको कंपेयर करें तो स्टार्टअप का जो मेट्रिक होता है वो होता है रेवेन्यू. उन्होंने रेवेन्यू इंक्रीज करना है, नंबर ऑफ एम्प्लॉयज़ रिड्यूस करना, राइट. सो इफ़ यू लुक एट फेसबुक का क्या है, फेसबुक का है 1.6 to 1.7 million पर एम्प्लॉई. सो $107 billion annual revenue पे, they have around 75,000 population. Compare this with the 4 Indian companies who have combined of 60 billion plus minus revenue. This means if Facebook का अगर metric use करेंगे तो वो जो 50-60 billion annual revenue बनाना है वो आपके सिर्फ 20,000 लोग बनाएंगे. अभी वो 1 million plus लोग बना रहे हैं. सो वो जो मॉडल है, वेदर इट्स एयरलिफ्ट, वेदर इट्स व्हाटएवर कंपनीज, उनका जो मॉडल है
it's very concentrated, and that's one of the reasons why the VC is looking at it as well कि यार कॉस्ट ही कोई नहीं, 60-70 बंदा जो है वो जाके बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स को घुमा रहा है.
एग्जैक्टली.
तो फॉर द कैपिटलिस्ट इट्स वेरी गुड, बट एक्चुअली इफ यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट क्रिएटिंग मिडिल क्लास जॉब्स,
राइट,
it generally tends not to do that. वो कहते हैं कि वो जॉब क्रिएट करते हैं, but they're generally targeting the masses, sure, but there is not a lot of social mobility in those jobs.
Right. And also they're also doing a service. What is that service? So I don't consider making few people filthy rich a service, right? But their service is actually solving a chronic problem in there. Right. And problem, I use it with quotes. Like Facebook, what problem is Facebook solving, right? Yeah. But Kareem does solve a problem, right? So Airlift does solve a problem. So उनकी जो civic duty है वो है कि we are solving a problem. We are not focusing on creating jobs per se. Jobs get created, great. Right, but हमारा जो problem solving is ours. So Pakistan needs both. But if I have to pick in a population of 22 crore, where 60% of your people are below 30, and a predominant majority are between 18 to 30 years of age, how do you feed them? Do you feed them by giving handouts, by becoming, let's say, Bill Gates, and then giving handouts and feeding them that way, or do you create jobs for them, right? So that's why the reason I have picked IT services is to create jobs and create middle class.
Right. Makes sense. How do you see the difference between what the IT sector growth that we're looking at and the startup growth that we've seen in 2021? I mean, there's been a huge boom there as well, over $400 million investment. Right. Even this year now, some people were saying it's going to slow down. International markets are very, very conservative now. Suddenly, obviously, economic situation is very different. Constantly, we're looking at the stock market.
Right.
Again, commodity prices very, very high. People are really looking at their wallets and really only spending on things that they know are a short success. But then we saw Bazaar getting 70 million only announced yesterday. Yeah. So we are hearing those success stories. And just as we're seeing the IT services sector finally beginning to have that sort of hyper growth, and the majority, I feel like that we're now seeing the same in the startup space as well.
Right.
How do you reconcile with both of them in Pakistan? IT services का तो आपने काफी डिटेल में एनालिसिस दे दिया, but startups के बारे में क्या पता है?
I think startup, I'm very excited about it, right? So mind my French, I think startup business is very sexy, right? And we do the grind, the monotony, and I don't want to repeat. तो पहले ही services पे बात हो गई है. So one thing that people who are commenting on startups and who are observing startup, one of the things that they have to realize is, Airlift raised a lot of money, kind of became a unicorn, first of its kind in Pakistan. And if you look at some sectors, the negative publicity or the targeting that they're doing for Airlift, without actually understanding globally how it works, right? So the poor guys have been, जो एक जिहाद कर रहे हैं, I would say, simple नहीं होता है. You're bringing in foreign investor, उनकी पूरी एक टीम होती है to do due diligence.
Right.
उन्होंने due diligence करने के बाद Airlift को एक valuation दिया, right? And now if you start criticizing Airlift without actually analyzing and then comparing Airlift with Thanos कि ये हो गया वो हो गया, without understanding the Thanos history either, I mean, shame on you, right? So right now I think the investors are smart. When investors invest in anything, they know not everything is a sure shot, right? The Bay Area में तो you wear your failure as a badge of honor. Right. Maybe you glamorize it too much, right? But that's the reality of it. अब पाकिस्तान का चक्कर ये है कि बहुत सारी चीज़ें एकदम से ऊपर आना शुरू हो गई. This is the first time we have the longest run of legitimate democracy, right? So a lot of things are opening up, media, young people are growing up. So a lot of things are happening simultaneously. And even some amount of reverse brain drain is also happening, right?
Absolutely.
So this is just like back in the days जब रेडियो बना था, right? So जो रेडियो सुन रहे होते थे उनको आप कहते यार ये लफंगे हैं, डाइजेस्ट पढ़ रहे होते थे यार ये लफंगे हैं. फिर जब टीवी आया तो फिर वो उन्होंने कहा यार रेडियो वाज बेटर, राइट? सो हम उस फेस से गुजरे. द ओनली प्रॉब्लम इज वो चीज़ें पहले 30-40 साल में होती थी, अब वो एवरी ईयर हो रही हैं, राइट? फेसबुक, इज इट कूल नॉट, शुड आई बी हैंगिंग आउट, टिकटॉक, उस पर मैंने क्या करना है, और साथ में ये स्टार्टअप्स भी होना शुरू हो गई. सो आई थिंक एज अ सोसाइटी वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड all of these are adding tremendous value to Pakistan.
Right.
The last thing we should be doing is pulling each other's legs, right? So I think startups are a great thing. They have put Pakistan on the international map. A lot of foreign investors are coming, and people like we were discussing Gobi Ventures. Even traditional businesses are now at least investing in those. They're getting a flavor of IT, whether it's through startup or IT services. So I think this is great, but we need to, if someone wants to do a long-term bet, they need to look what happened in Indonesia, what traditionally happens in Bay Area, and have realistic expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the reasons why. So I'm all about startups, and I think it's finally happening. To be very honest, it's been over a decade. We've been talking about it with the NICs and the Plan 9s and so on and so forth, and so now we're finally getting the validation कि यार कर सकते हैं और हो सकता है. My only concern with startups is not just with startups, but it's with the general business sense in this country, which is inherently consumption based, right? And I think one of the things that a lot of technocratic people have understood over the past 3 years, whether they belong to any side of the aisle in terms of politics, is that we can't afford to have a consumption based economic strategy anymore.
Exactly.
Right? It needs to be export based.
Right.
It needs to be wealth creation, and so. Sure, we can do all sorts of consumption-based optimization of your business services and solve those problems.
Right.
But until and unless we are essentially growing industries like the IT services or the textile or the even अगर गाड़ियाँ बना रहे हैं तो ये देखें कि यार कंटेनर 12,500 का हो गया 2,500 से चाइना से, तो maybe we can assemble it and send it to the Middle East. Right. So how can we? I think in terms of investors. And in terms of overall hamara push, one of the things that I'm really looking forward to see is when the entire hierarchy begins to understand कि यार पहली priority export based है.
Right.
और जब export based में wealth creation हो रही है तो जाहिर है उस पैसे ने कहीं तो move करना है.
Exactly.
And so automatically you're remaining. हमारा मसला ये ना, हम कहते हैं यार एक दफ़ा consumption based करके वो कर लो, automatically वो जगह. It's never that way. It's the other way around. पैसा होगा मैं spend करूँगा.
Right.
पहले तो आप बाहर से पैसा तो लेकर आए पाकिस्तान. And so that's why उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ही मैंने वो किया था कि हाउ डू यू सी, बिकॉज मुझे ये लगता है कि IT सर्विसेज इज नाउ एसेंशियल फॉर द ग्रोथ ऑफ स्टार्टअप्स एज वेल.
Right. So that's a very beautiful analysis. So 2 points I want to make on what you said. So first of all, IT services industry is very essential for startups, and the way I think they're essential is because when startups scale, right? And there is a term in Bay Area which they use, which is called blitz scaling, which means scaling very fast, right? And it's a whole different ball game. Different playbooks are needed if you want to scale that fast. None of Pakistani startups are going to go blitz scale, but still. So how do you manage that scale? Like for example, Airlift, right? Young people started off. Where are they going to get the top management they have done the hard work. They have the funding and everything. So where is the brain power going to come in that will show them how you scale, right? Obviously, कोई गोरा तो आएगा नहीं पाकिस्तान में, कैसे आएगा? आप देखें कि even people as brilliant as Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Google co-founder, their board told them that you can't scale this anymore. Get Eric Schmidt. So Eric Schmidt came in as an adult supervision. He was very successful. 8-10-12 साल के बाद, once Larry Page and Sergey were adult enough, he was made the president of the board and they took over. And that's a typical playbook. Except of Amazon and maybe 1 or 2 companies, all these startups very soon in their career, जब उनको validation मिल गई कि this is going to stay, the board brought in a professional CEO and the CEO took them forward. Even Jeff Bezos is a counter example. Even Jeff Bezos की case में भी what happened was 3-4 years into that, The board thought that Jeff Bezos is not the right person to be leading. And they sent Bill Campbell, who was his coach later on, to go and see. They had hired a chief operating officer, and they said, well, go and see, maybe this is the guy. That chief operating officer had scaled companies. So Bill Campbell went in. He spent one week there. He talked to people. He attended few meetings. He came back and he told the board that, look, 2 reasons why Jeff Bezos has to stay as CEO. Number one, people are willing to die for him, not for chief operating officer. But that's an emotional reason. Number 2, the chief operating officer the word he used was unnaturally focused on compensation matters. And that's a red flag for me. So they went on with Jeff Bezos, and the rest is history. But majority of the companies have scaled through profession. So where are these startups going to get those professional C-level executives? In services companies, right? Right. So that's one way how services companies will fuel the growth for startup. Now coming to the consumer base, and very brilliant analysis. You're absolutely right. Once dollar comes in, हमारी कंज्यूमर जिस तरह से हमारी रेट ऑफ पॉपुलेशन है, कंज्यूमर का नंबर तो बढ़ता ही जाएगा ना, उसको आप और मैं रोक नहीं सकते. अब उनके पास पैसा नहीं होगा खर्च करने का, तो कोई फायदा नहीं है. सो एक्सपोर्ट से जब आपका पैसा आएगा, आई फुली एग्री विद यू, दैट्स हाउ वी फील.
वो तो ऑटोमेटिक, वो तो ऑटोमेटेड है. मतलब कि जिस वक्त पैसा मार्केट में पड़ा हुआ है, तो ऑटोमेटिकली वो तो हर चलता फिरता एक ऐसे में बनाएगा और उसको जो है ना उसकी प्रॉब्लम एक सॉल्व कर रहा होगा. सो वी आर एट द 1 hour 21 minute mark, and thank you so much for giving us the extra time, because हमारा 1 hour commitment थी. I'm going to ask you one last question. I had a lot more to talk about, but this, this can go on for 2 hours. This is a question I ask all of the guests, and you've been around, you've been to different countries as well. You've had a very interesting experience, particularly IT. बड़ी मजे की, multiple times मैं कह चुका हूँ, बड़ी मजे की space है. Exciting times है. Finally बहुत exciting times है.
Right.
How do you see Pakistan 30 years from now in 2050? Knowing what you know now, seeing what you've seen over the years.
I really don't know. Right, so I think few of the things, because there's a lot of if then else's, and I will only talk about IT services. I believe that what Pakistan would be 30 years from now would be determined in the next 5 to 7 years, right? Because across the border, we have so much similarities with Indian from cultural point of view and all of that, and if I might say that in terms of the fanaticism and the politics and all of that BJP is currently going through. This is something that we went through in 1980s, right? Been there, done it. We know how it ends, right? So there's so many similarities.
We know the fire burn.
We know the fire,
exactly.
So there's so many similarities. If companies like Systems, if we are $500 million plus revenue, and not valuation. Valuation तो हमारी 600 million पे हो गई थी. अभी थोड़ा स्टॉक कम हुआ हुआ है. इंशाल्लाह दोबारा ऊपर जाएगा. So $500 million, right, within next few years, and we already have targets, and we're chasing those targets, then that will be the game changer. And then I could just speculate, from that point onwards, what Indian IT industry was from that point onwards 30 years into future, that's where we have the potential of being in.
Give me a best case scenario. What's the number we could potentially
best case scenario really is we all hope we achieve what India just achieved, which is they now have more IT exports than the oil that Saudi Arabia exports, right?
Right.
We just hope that's where we'll end up being. It's unlikely that would be the case because there are things which are beyond our control.
Right.
Right now, what worries me the most for us that we might not reach there is the fact that if I look at IT services industry, there is no worthy second or third to Systems. That's not good for us.
Yeah.
And that's not
very
good
easy
for
to
IT.
get complacent, right? Because you're at the top.
Exactly. And I was listening to the YouTube CEO. So when YouTube captured the whole market, so someone was interviewing him and they said that, just like you are going through the journey, he said, okay, now you're here this year and YouTube has all the market share. So what were you thinking behind closed doors? He said, we were very worried because for the reason that we will get complacent, you need to have a really smart number 2 chasing you. That's what brings the best out of you. We don't have that in Pakistan. And that's scary for Systems. That's scary for our IT industries. We could happen. I think our existing potential competitors, they need to wean themselves off of being happy and content with the $2-3 million they make every year. They need to invest in their own growth. A lot of these investor co-founders, they've done the hard work. 10-15 years they have been around, they are sustaining it, they are reinvesting in startups rather than own growth, right? So if I have to bet on Muzamil or Kashif, and I'm betting on Muzamil, what does this tell you about me? That's the problem. So that's why we don't have worthy number 2. And if we don't have, one company can't shoulder all the burden. Then this would be the really doomsday scenario for us. And I hope, inshallah, it doesnn't happen.
Makes a lot of sense, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all the insight. And I mean, it's a phenomenal journey. I do hope, inshallah, we see systems going where you guys are headed towards. And I also hope that worthy number 2 and number 3 and number 50 वो तमाम इस इंडस्ट्री में आए. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you very much.
And for all of you guys, thank you so much for watching. अगर आपको एपिसोड पसंद आई और अपने दोस्तों यार से जरूर शेयर करिएगा. यूट्यूब वाले लाइक का बटन दबाएंगे, एंगेजमेंट बढ़ेगी, ज़्यादा लोगों तक हमारी कॉन्वर्सेशन पहुंचेगी. फेसबुक वाले नीचे दी गई लिंक पर क्लिक करके TBT कम्युनिटी ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं, जहाँ पर हम डिफरेंट फीडबैक भी लेते हैं, गेस्ट रिकमेंडेशंस भी लेते हैं और आर्टिकल्स भी शेयर करते हैं. सो यू कैन एंजॉय दैट एज वेल. ऑडियो प्लेटफॉर्म्स वाले सब्सक्राइब कर दबाएंगे, आने वाले एपिसोड्स की आपको नोटिफिकेशन मिलेगी. काशिफ भाई, किसी बात से आप एग्री या डिसएग्री करते हैं, कमेंट सेक्शन में बताएं. व्हाट डू यू थिंक अबाउट द फ्यूचर ऑफ सिस्टम्स? व्हाट डू यू थिंक अबाउट द फ्यूचर ऑफ द IT इंडस्ट्री? वुड लव टू हियर योर थॉट्स. अगर इफ यूड लाइक टू सपोर्ट द चैनल, इजी पैसा जायज़ कैश यहाँ पर कहीं पर आ रहा होगा. You can support the channel by giving ₹1 or as much as you'd like. It's a thought that counts. But anyways, this was Sayyid Muzamil Hasan Zaidi. You were watching Thought Behind Things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.